On my wedding night, my husband left me for another woman. I did not cry. I did not beg him to stay. I quietly disappeared for 3 days. By the time the mansion was empty and the company had changed hands, he finally panicked and begged, realizing he had crossed the one person pulling all the strings. On my wedding night, I sat alone on a bridal bed covered in red rose petals. The deep crimson silk wedding dress, worth nearly $12,000, wrapped around my body like an ice-cold shell. The bedroom was over 1,000 square feet, lit by the soft glow of a crystal chandelier. Scented candles burned silently on the table, and the vintage wine remained untouched in its ice bucket. Everything looked like the extravagant dream any girl would wish for on her wedding day. The only problem was that the man who was supposed to step forward and lift my veil was standing in front of the mirror, casually adjusting the dark blue tie I had bought him last week. That tie cost over $4,000, but to Vance Sterling right now, it probably meant no more than a cheap rag. For the past 3 years, the money he spent did not belong to him. It flowed from my accounts, from my corporation, from everything I had intentionally placed into his hands. Vance tugged slightly at his collar, looking at himself in the mirror, and spoke with a calmness that bordered on cruelty. "I have to go over to Briar's place tonight. I promised her before the wedding. Her health is fragile, and she gets scared being alone." I sat perfectly still, not blinking. On my wedding night, my husband told me he had to go take care of another woman. He said it so lightly, as if informing me that it was going to rain outside. There was no guilt, no hesitation. He did not even bother to turn around and look at my face. I stared at Vance's broad back in his $15,000 bespoke suit. 3 years ago, he was just a struggling sales rep making $3,000 a month, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt to his interview, his hands shaking so much he dropped the pen when signing his name. I was the one who pulled him out of that damp studio apartment in Koreatown. I brought him into Kensington Holdings, placed him in the chief executive officer chair, gave him cars, real estate, status, connections, and the glowing halo he delusionally believed he had earned through his own talent. Seeing that I remained silent, Vance tilted his head slightly, as if my silence was ruining his mood. He turned around, his eyes holding that familiar glint of annoyance. "Genevieve, can you be reasonable for once? Briar is delicate, and she always gets panic attacks on special days. I will just check on her and come back." Special days? I almost laughed out loud. So, in his eyes, our wedding night was a special day for Briar Sinclair, not for the wife sitting right here on this bridal bed. For the past 3 years, the name Briar had wedged itself into my life like a rotting splinter. When he went on business trips with her, he claimed she was afraid of flying. When he stayed awake all night at the hospital with her, he claimed she had no family. When he used my supplementary black card to buy her designer bags, diamond watches, and necklaces, he claimed he was just taking pity on a pathetic old friend. Meanwhile, I, his legal wife, the person who pushed him to his current heights, always had to learn how to be generous, how to be understanding, how to stay silent like a decorative piece of furniture in this house. I used to cry. I used to grab his arm right in front of the elevator doors. I used to ask him what I even meant to him. I used to call him all night just to get an answer, but all I ever received was coldness, mockery, and words that stabbed right through my pride. "Do not overreact. You are a wealthy heiress. Why are you so petty? I married you. What more do you want?" Every time that happened, he became more convinced that I could never leave him. He thought my tears were a sign of weakness. He thought my endurance was a surrender. He thought the woman who had elevated him would forever kneel at the feet of his cheap love. But he was wrong. Tonight, I did not cry. I did not stand up to grab his arm. I simply took off my wedding ring gently, placed it on the edge of the bed, and looked straight into his eyes. "Fine, go." Vance froze. He had clearly prepared a whole arsenal of excuses to deal with my jealousy. He was waiting for me to cry, waiting for me to scream, waiting for me to lose control so he would have a reason to scold me for being unreasonable. But I was too calm. That absolute calm made the corners of his mouth stiffen for a fraction of a second. "What kind of game are you playing now?" I smiled very faintly. "No game. I am just tired." His eyes darkened. That sentence probably aggravated him more than any sobbing could. A man like Vance Sterling needed a woman to suffer for him to prove his own worth. The calmer I was, the more insulted he felt. He picked up the keys to the black Porsche I had bought him for his birthday last year and spoke coldly. "Genevieve, do not think this attitude scares me. I told you, the person I love is Briar. Marrying you was about our families, business, and responsibility. You should know your place." I looked at him for a long time. That face used to make me soft-hearted. It used to make me think that if I was just good enough, he would eventually turn around. But now, I only found it laughable. A man standing on the staircase I built was looking down, teaching me to know my place. I spoke softly. Yeah, I know. You should remember your place too. Vance frowned. What is that supposed to mean? I did not answer. I turned my face toward the window, looking out at the dazzling lights of Los Angeles sprawling below the Beverly Hills mansion. Far away in downtown LA, the tallest skyscraper belonging to Kensington Holdings was still brightly lit. That was not just my family's asset. It was the battlefield I had reclaimed inch by inch over the past 5 years. It was the place where people who once viewed me as a weak little girl now bowed their heads and called me Madam Chairwoman. Vance did not know this, or, more accurately, I had allowed him not to know. To the outside world, Kensington Holdings was still under my father's name. My older brother was the bright heir, while I was just the second daughter used in a strategic marriage with the declining Sterling family. I played that role far too well. So well that Vance genuinely believed he was saving me through this marriage. The reality was that I chose him as a pawn greedy enough, vain enough, and stupid enough to willingly step into the trap I had already set. Bang! The bedroom door slammed shut. Vance's footsteps faded down the hallway. A minute later, the roar of a car engine echoed in the driveway before speeding out of the mansion gates. I remained perfectly still on the bridal bed, listening as the sound vanished into the night. The room returned to its dead silence. The candles kept burning, the wine remained cold, the roses still smelled sweet, but my marriage had died completely and cleanly like cold ash on the very first night. I stood up, unclasped the heavy diamond earrings, and placed them on the vanity. In the mirror, the woman in the red wedding dress stared back at me with eyes as cold as deep water. The girl who used to stay up all night waiting for her husband was gone. The foolish wife who wondered what she did wrong was gone. Tonight, I did not lose a husband. I merely liquidated a failed investment. I took my phone out of the drawer and tapped the number pinned at the top of my contacts. The other end picked up almost immediately. Miss Kensington. The voice of Harrison, my trusted executive assistant, was deep and alert as always. He had followed me since the days I quietly learned to read financial reports in the company's basement. He was also the only person who knew my true nature. Execute the reclamation plan, I said slowly. The line was silent for exactly 3 seconds before Harrison replied. Understood. The legal files are ready. The auditing department has finalized the ultimate report. The total amount Vance Sterling embezzled from Kensington Holdings over the past 3 years is $6.5 million. The shell contracts, fake vendors, wire transfers to Breyer Sinclair, and the assets registered under her relatives have all been sealed as evidence. $6.5 million. I closed my eyes. From the very first $12,000 he claimed as an entertainment expense but actually used to take Breyer to Cabo San Lucas, to the luxury Aspen condo worth $750,000 under her cousin's name. Every single dollar, every single cent, I had let him take. Not because I was ignorant, but because I needed him to be greedy enough, dirty enough, and guilty enough so that when he finally fell, he would never be able to stand back up. Harrison asked quietly, "Where do you want to start?" I looked at the solitary wedding ring resting on the edge of the bed and curled my lips. Cancel Vance's supplementary black card. Repossess the car. Have all the domestic staff vacate the Beverly Hills mansion before 6 in the morning. Send out an internal memo stating that, as of tomorrow, Vance Sterling no longer has the authority to sign any documents for Kensington Holdings. In 3 days, announce his official termination. As for the mansion, let him have it for one last night. I paused, lowering my voice. Let him sleep one last time in the dream that everything still belongs to him. Outside the window, Vance's taillights had completely vanished into the darkness. Perhaps right now, he was speeding toward Breyer's small apartment, ready to pull that woman into his arms, smugly thinking that I was crying my eyes out in the bridal suite. He would never know that the moment he walked out of this house, the door to return had silently locked behind him. I changed out of the red wedding dress and put on a sharp black suit already prepared in the closet. The black fabric hugged me neatly, cold and razor sharp. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time, wiped the bright red lipstick off my mouth, and applied a much darker shade. The honeymoon was over. From now on, there was no more bride Genevieve. There was only Genevieve Kensington, the woman who would personally take back everything the traitor had stolen. By the time Vance's Porsche had cleared the gates, I was no longer standing by the window. I went down to the first-floor home office, a place he had never been permitted to enter. The room had soundproof glass, a built-in wall safe, and 3 monitors constantly wired directly to Kensington Holdings' financial mainframes. I sat down in the leather chair and opened every digital file Harrison had sent. Vance's name was plastered all over forged receipts, fake contracts, and funds laundered through shadow subsidiaries. Every number felt like a blade, no longer stabbing my heart, but slashing straight through the hypocritical mask of the man I had just called my husband. At nearly 3 a.m, Harrison called back. "Miss Kensington, the black card is frozen. The repossession order has been sent to the Asset Management Division. All staff will be out of the mansion by 6. As for the termination notice, I have it on standby. It will automatically broadcast to the entire network in exactly 3 days." I looked down at the wedding ring resting in my palm, the diamond flashing coldly under the desk lamp. Good. When he returns tomorrow morning, do not stop him. Let him walk right into an empty house. Do you want to leave anything behind? I stayed silent for a few seconds before answering. A deactivated black card and a piece of paper. What should it say? I picked up a pen. Each word appeared neatly on the crisp white paper. "I am leaving. Keep this house if you can." Harrison did not ask any further questions. He knew me too well. Some words look like yielding, but are actually a sealed death warrant. I did not need to argue with Vance on our wedding night. A man like him, the longer he is left alone in his delusions, the harder it will hurt when he finally wakes up. Dear listeners, if you enjoy this, please leave a like to support my channel. Wishing all of you tuning in an abundance of health and peace. The next morning, as the sunlight pierced through the thin blinds, Vance woke up in Briar's cramped apartment. The room was barely 400 square feet. The ceiling had peeling water stains, and the smell of cheap perfume mixed with overnight instant ramen made him frown. Briar lay curled up next to him, her hair spread across the pillow, her eyes showing traces of fatigue, though her makeup was meticulously done. Seeing him move, she immediately wrapped her arms around his waist, her voice whining. "Vance, do you really have to go back? Genevieve must be so mad at me." I really did not mean to cause trouble. Vance stroked her hair, his expression instantly softening. He always loved this fragile side of Briar. He loved the feeling of being a woman's sole protector. In his eyes, I was always too cold, too proud, and too difficult to control. "Do not mention her. She is just throwing a tantrum. I know her. She cannot survive more than a day without me." Briar looked up, her eyes sparkling. "Really? I am so scared she is going to force you to leave me." Vance chuckled, a smile full of arrogance. "She does not have the guts. Kensington Holdings relies heavily on me now. The Kensington family needs to save face. She will make a fuss for a few days, and then she will know better and call me back." He spoke with absolute certainty, as if declaring an unchangeable law of the universe. It was almost noon when he finally left Briar's apartment. Before he stepped out, she deliberately left a faint lipstick smudge on his collar. Vance saw it but did not wipe it off. He probably wanted me to see it. He wanted to use it as a warning, to make me understand that aside from me, there was another woman who loved him to the point of desperation. When the car arrived back at the mansion, Vance walked into the grand living room with the posture of a victor. But within seconds, the smile completely vanished from his lips. The house was dead quiet. There was no sound of maids cleaning, no butler bowing to greet him, no smell of morning coffee, and no sight of me sitting on the sofa waiting to interrogate him. The heavy drapes were drawn shut, plunging the massive living room into a cold, grayish light. It was so extravagantly empty it felt like a tomb. "Genevieve." His voice echoed and dissolved into the void. No one answered. Vance frowned, tossing his car keys onto the coffee table. The clatter of metal against marble sounded bone dry. That was when he finally noticed the black card and the neatly folded piece of paper resting right beside it. He picked up the note. Just one short sentence. No resentment, no explanations, no begging. He stared at it for a long time and then burst out laughing. "Genevieve Kensington, you really know how to put on a show." He crumpled the paper and tossed it into the trash can, his eyes full of contempt. In his mind, I was still the dramatic wife using the runaway tactic to force him to bow his head. He even leaned back into the sofa, propped his feet up on the table, and looked around the mansion with utter satisfaction, acting as if the place now truly belonged to him. But a few minutes later, hunger struck. He opened the custom refrigerator, only to find it completely empty except for a few bottles of filtered water. He tried to call the butler, but realized he did not even have the man's phone number saved. He opened a food delivery app, but fumbled around because he did not even know how to properly enter the gated Beverly Hills address. At that exact moment, for the first time in 3 years, Vance realized that the luxurious life he thought he commanded only operated because I was standing right behind it. I sat in the top-floor executive suite at Kensington Holdings, watching the security camera feed transmitted directly from the mansion. On the monitor, the man who had swaggered out of the bridal suite was now standing in the middle of a massive, empty gourmet kitchen, his face growing increasingly ugly. Harrison placed a hot cup of tea in front of me. "Miss Kensington, he still thinks you are just throwing a fit." I took a sip of the tea, the bitterness spreading slowly across my tongue. Then let him think that for one more day. Outside the glass windows, the city was as loud and bustling as if nothing had ever happened. But inside my mind, the storm was already changing direction. I was in no rush. Vance took 3 years of my life. I was going to use 3 days to make him understand exactly what losing everything felt like. That afternoon, Vance remained in the mansion alone. At first, he managed to keep up his fake composure. He even went down to the wine cellar, opened a bottle of vintage red, and poured it into a crystal glass. The same glasses he used to brag to his friends were exclusively for high society. But wine cannot fill an empty stomach. The larger the house felt, the more the silence wrapped around his neck like a cold hand tightening its grip. There was no maid asking what he wanted for dinner, no butler giving him his schedule, no sound of my footsteps echoing down the hallway. There was only the hum of the central air conditioning and the ticking of the wall clock, striking right against Vance's slowly fracturing ego. I watched it all through the monitors in my private conference room. The security cameras caught him ransacking the kitchen, yanking open every custom cabinet, scowling at the gleaming silver cutlery but failing to find even a single packet of ramen. He kicked the cabinet door hard, cursing something vicious under his breath. Harrison stood behind me, his voice devoid of emotion. He tried to order Postmates 3 times but canceled all of them. He probably cannot figure out the security gate access codes. I gently set my teacup down. For 3 years, the man had not even had to secure a single meal for himself. Harrison looked at the screen, a flash of disdain in his eyes. And yet he still thought you could not survive a day without him. I did not reply. Some men are deeply peculiar. They are spoon-fed by a woman, elevated to the top by someone else's money and endless effort, and then they turn around and despise the very person who held them up. That Vance did not love me no longer caused me pain. What disgusted me was that he had turned my kindness into a doormat. By nightfall, Vance finally broke. He sat on the sofa, clutching his phone, staring at my name and his contacts for a very long time. I guessed he was debating what tone to use when calling me. Reproachful, patronizing, or faking magnanimity? A moment later, he hit the call button. My personal phone had been powered off since last night. It lay dead inside my desk drawer. The robotic voicemail operator echoed through the mansion's living room. "The subscriber you have dialed is currently unavailable." Vance froze. He stared at the screen and dialed again. The same icy automated response answered him. A third time. A fourth time. He began pacing back and forth across the living room, each footstep heavier than the last. "Genevieve Kensington, you have got some nerve. Shutting off your phone on me?" he muttered to himself, his voice angry, but a sliver of panic already surfacing in his eyes. If I had cried, if I had texted him a barrage of insults, if I had blown up his phone, he would have felt secure. Because when someone is throwing a tantrum, it means they still care. But I gave him absolute silence. That silence was the very thing making Vance lose his mind. In the middle of the night, he finally walked upstairs to the master bedroom. The bed still had the red sheets. The rose petals were withering. The ice in the wine bucket had melted to water. Half the bed was chillingly empty, as if no one had ever slept there. He stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. Perhaps it was the first time he realized this room was warm not because it was luxurious, but because someone had always been standing behind him, arranging every detail of his life. I did not sleep at the mansion that night. I stayed in the private suite, attached to the chairman's office. Spread across my desk were Vance's termination documents, civil lawsuit filings, the forensic audit reports, and the draft for the PR press release. I read every single page until dawn. Every signature, every corporate seal, every anomalous transaction reminded me that I could not afford to be soft. A man accustomed to betrayal will not feel grateful for forgiveness. He will only view forgiveness as a free pass to hurt me a second time. The next morning, Vance showed up at Kensington Holdings wearing the most expensive suit in his closet. He tried to groom himself meticulously, but the dark circles under his eyes and the sheer exhaustion on his face were impossible to hide. He walked into the grand lobby holding the posture of a CEO, his chin lifted, his gaze looking straight ahead, acting as though his mere presence would vaporize any rumors. But this time, everything was different. The receptionist saw him, stood up to greet him, but actively avoided his eyes. The security guards at the elevator banks nodded slightly, but the profound reverence they used to show was entirely gone. Employees walking past him hesitated for a split second before quickly looking away. The shifts were so subtle an outsider might miss them, but for a man who fed off the admiring gazes of others like Vance, it felt like a direct slap to the face. He scowled and walked briskly toward the executive elevator. He tapped his keycard against the reader. The light blinked red. Access denied. Vance stood dead in his tracks. The red light flashed a second time, then a third. Vance gripped the card tightly, his forced composure beginning to shatter. A young security guard stationed nearby stepped forward. His tone was perfectly polite, but his eyes lacked the usual fear. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling. The executive elevators are now restricted to senior board members following a system update this morning." Vance whipped around, his voice turning to ice. "What did you just say?" "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Kensington Holdings. Are you a new hire? Do you not know who I am?" The guard lowered his head slightly, but his back remained perfectly straight. "I know who you are, sir. But your access card was temporarily suspended this morning." "Suspended?" Vance barked out a dry, harsh laugh. "Who the hell has the authority to suspend my card?" At that exact moment, I was standing behind the one-way glass on the 48th floor, quietly watching the surveillance feed. His face was magnified on the monitor, the veins pulsing visibly at his temples. For 3 years, he was used to people bowing and parting the seas for him. The simple fact that an electronic card reader no longer recognized him was enough to make his internal world tremble. Harrison stood beside me holding an iPad. Human Resources sent out an internal memo suspending Vance Sterling's administrative authorities pending an audit, but the official termination broadcast is still scheduled for tomorrow. I looked at Vance raging in the lobby and said evenly, "Let him take the employee elevator." Harrison glanced up at me. "Are you sure? I want him to walk through the exact same gazes he used to look down upon." 5 minutes later, Vance stepped into the crowded employee elevator amidst a bizarre, suffocating silence. No one spoke, but the sideways glances that quickly darted away were more humiliating than outright mockery. There was a manager in there whom Vance had publicly berated over a minor typo. There was an analyst who had to work past midnight just because Vance wanted to impress Breyer with a fabricated project deck. There was a staff member transferred out of his department simply for making him lose face. Today, for the first time, Vance stood shoulder to shoulder with them. No private entry, no VIP elevator, no artificial halo protecting him. When the doors opened on the 36th floor, Vance stormed straight toward the CEO's office. But the locks on the door had been swapped. The brass plaque bearing his name was gone, leaving only a polished, empty rectangular space on the wall, as if he had been physically peeled out of existence. "What is the meaning of this?" he roared. The executive secretary, Chloe, stood up. She crossed her hands politely over her stomach and said, "Mr. Sterling, per the board of directors, this office has been sealed for a document audit. You are not permitted to enter without approval from the legal department." "Legal?" He pointed a finger right in her face. "Whose payroll are you on to speak to me like that?" Chloe paled slightly but kept her voice steady and clear. "I am on the Kensington Holdings payroll, sir." It was a soft statement, but it was enough to drop a dead silence over the entire corridor. Vance stared at her in disbelief, utterly shocked that the secretary who used to bow and fetch his coffee would dare talk back. He raised his hand, about to slam it onto her desk, when his phone rang. It was a FaceTime call from Breyer. He looked around, suppressed his rage, and declined the call. But seconds later, a text popped up. "Vance, why is the card declining?" The cashier said it's frozen. "I'm at Rodeo Drive. This is so humiliating." Vance froze. The sheer fury on his face cracked, revealing raw panic. He immediately dialed the bank, desperately trying to maintain his commanding tone. "This is Vance Sterling. Check the limit on my infinite black card right now." The voice on the other end spoke for a long time. I could not hear it, but watching his face drain of blood, I knew the bank had delivered the exact script I requested. That card never belonged to him. It was a supplementary card issued against my personal assets, and I had killed it. Vance gripped his phone so hard his knuckles turned white. He started calling me. 1 call, 2 calls, 5 calls. All went straight to voicemail. He switched to calling my father, then my father's private secretary, then several board members who used to share expensive scotch with him. No one picked up. Some sent back cold, automated rejections. One simply texted back, "This is an internal Kensington family matter. I cannot intervene." By now, Vance genuinely felt the terror setting in. He was no longer standing high above the world. The floor beneath his feet was cracking apart. I left the surveillance room and walked into the executive boardroom. At the massive mahogany table, 12 senior executives were already seated. The moment I walked in, they all stood up in unison. "Madam Chairwoman." I pulled out the center chair, sat down, and opened the black file folder in front of me. "Let us begin. As of today, every single project touched by Vance Sterling will undergo a forensic audit. Anyone involved had better confess before I find out myself." The air in the room instantly snapped tight as a guitar string. I knew this storm was not just going to sweep Vance away. The parasites who fed off his power, the ones who used his name to embezzle from Kensington, the ones who thought I was just a naive heiress playing house today, they were all going to pay. Harrison's phone buzzed. He checked the screen and handed it to me. The hallway cameras showed Vance sprinting toward the boardroom, only to be physically restrained by 2 security guards outside the heavy doors. His face was flushed crimson, his eyes wild with fury and dread. "Where is Genevieve Kensington? Tell her to come out here right now." I looked at the screen, the corners of my lips lifting into a micro smile. "Not yet." Vance's voice bled through the hallway, enraged and utterly out of control. The boardroom doors were heavily soundproofed, but through the monitors, I could clearly see his lips screaming my name, his hands violently shoving against the guards as if breaking into this room would magically restore his kingdom. It was pathetic. Some people live inside the illusion of power for so long they forget that true power does not reside in a loud voice, a $15,000 suit, or the fancy leather chair they used to sit in. True power belongs to the person whose signature can make their entire world collapse. I closed the file and looked at the 12 executives. Not a single one dared to breathe heavily. The men who used to raise their glasses to Vance, who called him brother, who assumed I was just the rich wife sitting behind the curtain, were now staring at the table, actively avoiding my eyes. I spoke slowly, opened the doors. Harrison paused for a fraction of a second, but immediately signaled the guards. The heavy oak doors swung open. Vance practically lunged into the room, but the moment he crossed the threshold, he stopped dead in his tracks. The scene inside completely shattered his expectations. I was not crying in the corner. I was not flustered by his sudden intrusion. I was sitting at the head of the table. Spread before me were the forensic audit files, and behind me, a massive LED screen displayed Kensington Holdings' entire financial web. On both sides of the table, the highest-ranking executives stood in absolute terrified silence, treating me with a deference they had never once shown him. "Madam Chairwoman." Vance's face turned ash-white. The title hit him like a sledgehammer, smashing the last remnants of his arrogance. But he forced a smile, a twisted, pitiful smile. "Genevieve, are you done acting out? Whatever issues we have in our marriage, why are you dragging the whole corporation into it?" Dear listeners, if you enjoy this, please leave a like to support my channel. Wishing all of you tuning in an abundance of health and peace. I raised my eyes to look at him, my voice dead calm. "Marital issues are resolved with divorce papers. You embezzling $6.5 million from Kensington Holdings is a matter for the federal authorities." The entire boardroom fell dead silent. Vance went rigid, his eyes twitching. But he quickly slammed his hand onto the table, his voice a low growl. "What garbage are you spewing? 6 million? Do you have any proof?" I tilted my head toward Harrison. He pressed a remote, and the massive screen instantly lit up with individual transactions, forged contracts, fake hospitality invoices, and a web of wire transfers funneled through shell companies straight into bank accounts under Briar Sinclair's relatives. As the list scrolled, Vance's face lost all color. He stared at the screen as if trying to laser the numbers away with his eyes. "Impossible, this is..." I cut him off. $12,000 taking Briar to Cabo. A $750,000 condo in Aspen registered to her cousin. A $160,000 Mercedes purchased using the Midwest Expansion Fund. An $80,000 diamond set you expensed as a client gift. Shall I keep reading? Vance snapped his head toward the executives, desperately seeking an ally, but no one even looked at him. The rats who used to follow him knew perfectly well this ship had a hole in its hull. Anyone who jumped to his defense now would drown with him. He swallowed hard, his voice suddenly dropping an octave. Genevieve, there has to be a misunderstanding. Everything I did for the company. After all these years at Kensington, if I don't get credit for success, I should at least get credit for hard work. Please don't blow this out of proportion just because you're mad about last night. I smiled a very hollow smile. You still think I am doing this out of jealousy? The question made his face flush. He took a step toward me, dropping his voice into a coaxing tone. I know I messed up last night. I shouldn't have left you alone. But Briar was seriously unwell. I just went to check on her. You are my wife. You have to be understanding. I stared at the man in front of me. Even at the bitter end, he did not apologize for betraying me. He was only begging me not to take away the lifestyle he was leeching off. That truth was colder than any curse word. I slid a file across the table toward him. Sign the handover documents. As of this exact second, you no longer have executive authority over any project at Kensington Holdings. Corporate accounts, company cars, your office, your assistants, all access rights are revoked. If you cooperate, I will let legal handle this internally. If you do not cooperate, I hand this file to the district attorney's office by close of business today. Vance looked at the file like it was a death sentence. His hands trembled, but he still tried to act tough. You wouldn't dare. If something happens to me, the Sterling family will not sit still. And your father would never allow you to destroy this marriage. I stood up. The room somehow grew even quieter. I walked slowly over to him, staring straight into the eyes that had once foolishly melted my heart. Vance, do you still not get it? My father handed the reins of Kensington Holdings over to me 2 years ago. The Sterling family is only surviving today because of my contracts. As for this marriage, the moment you walked out of the bridal suite last night, it ceased to exist. Right on cue, Vance's phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was his father. The moment he answered, the screaming on the other end was so loud the entire boardroom could hear it. You absolute moron! What the hell did you do to make Kensington pull every single contract from us? The banks are calling to call in our loans, and our suppliers are canceling orders left and right. Vance stood paralyzed. The phone slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a hollow clatter. I did not look at him anymore. I walked back to my chair, signed my name on the final executive order, and said, "Escort Mr. Sterling out." 2 security guards stepped forward. This time, Vance did not put up a fight. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and disbelief, as if only just realizing that the woman he abandoned on their wedding night was never the weak one. As the boardroom doors closed, I heard him screaming from the hallway. I set my pen down. My voice was incredibly soft but carried across the room. You chose this ending yourself. Vance was marched out of the Kensington Holdings skyscraper under the silent, watchful eyes of dozens of employees. No one laughed, no one gossiped out loud. But that sheer, collective silence was more degrading than being cursed at. The man who used to stride through the lobby like a king was now being flanked by security guards like a trespasser. He violently shrugged off the guard's hands, trying to salvage his last shred of dignity. I can walk myself. The guards took a half step back but continued to shadow him. Vance straightened his collar, lifted his chin, and walked out the glass doors. Except the black Porsche that was usually parked out front was gone. In its place stood an agent from the Corporate Asset Management Division, holding a clipboard. Mr. Sterling, the vehicle has been towed to the corporate impound. Here is the repossession slip. Vance snatched the paper and tore it to shreds before even reading it. That is my car. The agent bowed his head, his tone completely flat. The vehicle is registered to the corporation. The authorizing purchaser was Chairwoman Kensington. You were merely granted driving privileges. The words struck him right across the face. Vance stood in the plaza, empty-handed. His wallet held a few crumpled bills, his credit cards were frozen, his car was gone, his office sealed, and his phone buzzed continuously with desperate calls from his father. He did not dare answer them. That ringtone was no longer the concern of a loving family. It was a debt collector's bell, the sound of the Sterling family's collapse dragging him down with it. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching him stumble toward the street. Harrison stood behind me, delivering the updates in a monotone voice. The Sterling family has received the contract termination notices. 3 major banks are calling in their loans. Several subcontractors have preemptively sent apology letters, claiming Vance Sterling forced them into unfavorable terms. I was not surprised. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. The people who bowed to Vance never respected him. They only respected the fact that he was the Kensington son-in-law, backed by the Kensington Empire. Once that shadow vanished, he was nothing but an empty shell. Any movement from Briar Sinclair? Harrison handed me the iPad. On the screen was the CCTV footage from the hallway of Briar's apartment complex. She was dragging a designer suitcase toward the elevator, wearing a luxury dress I recognized from Vance's supplementary card statements. She was not fragile like she was during those midnight phone calls. Her movements were fast and ruthless, as if she had prepared this escape route ages ago. I watched for a few seconds. Send her location to Vance. Harrison raised an eyebrow. You want him to catch her? I want him to see with his own eyes the kind of love he abandoned me for on our wedding night. Half an hour later, Vance took a cab to Briar's complex. The cab fare was borrowed from an old frat brother. After transferring the $20, the friend texted back a freezing message. This is the last time, man. Vance sprinted to the lobby just in time to see Briar waiting for her Uber with her luggage. He froze, then rushed forward and grabbed her arm. Briar, where are you going? Briar flinched, but when she got a good look at the state he was in, her eyes shifted instantly. The innocent look was gone. The tears were gone. The soft, cotton candy voice was gone. All that remained was raw annoyance and disgust she could not even bother to hide. Let go of me. Vance acted like he didn't hear her. He gripped her tighter, his voice hoarse. You saw the news, didn't you? Genevieve has lost her mind. She set me up. Don't be scared, I'll fix this. As long as you stay with me, I will take everything back. Briar laughed. A short, sharp laugh that cut like glass. Take it back? With what? Your cards are frozen, your car is repossessed, and you're fired. Vance, wake up. You are not the CEO of Kensington Holdings anymore. Vance's face drained of color. He looked at her as if staring at a stranger. What are you talking about? You said as long as you had me, it was enough. Briar violently yanked her arm away. When you had money, a car, a mansion, and a title, yes, it was enough. What do you have now? Did you really think I was desperately in love with a married man who only knew how to use his wife's money to sugar daddy me? The words paralyzed him. All the sweet nothings he believed, the nights she cried for him to come over, the I only need you shattered right in front of his face. His voice trembled. Briar, stop joking around. I am in this mess because of you. She pulled her suitcase back, her eyes filled with revulsion. Because of me? No, because you're an idiot. Genevieve Kensington gave you the world and you actually thought you were a genius. You used her money to buy me gifts, and I took them. So what? You gave them willingly. Now that you've lost everything, don't drag me down with you. Vance lunged for the suitcase. Briar screamed. The two of them began physically fighting right in the middle of the lobby. Security guards ran over. Pedestrians pulled out their phones to record. A man who used to step out of luxury sedans in bespoke suits was now standing in a public lobby, fighting his mistress, begging like a beggar for a final scrap of warmth. I watched the live video feed on the monitor. I didn't feel the vindication I thought I would. I just felt cold. So the thing he called love was so cheap that a single declined credit card was enough to expose its true face. Do we intervene? Harrison asked. I turned away, refusing to watch anymore. No. He picked her. He can listen to her answer. That afternoon, the video of Vance and Briar fighting in the apartment lobby began circulating in private Wall Street and high society group chats. At first, it was just veiled gossip, but soon someone recognized him as the former CEO of Kensington Holdings. It exploded. I did not let the PR department intervene. Some wounds do not need to be cut deeper by your own hands. You just have to drag them into the light so everyone can see how rotten the inside is. Vance was escorted to the security office by the building guards, and Briar immediately jumped into an Uber and fled. She left decisively, not looking back at him even once. Harrison sent me the final photo. Vance sitting alone on a plastic chair in the security booth. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair a mess, his eyes bloodshot. He looked exactly like a man who had just woken up from a billionaire's dream, only to realize he was lying at the bottom of a well. I closed the iPad, harboring absolutely zero pity. Not because I am ruthless, but because I had given him too many chances. 3 years. If he had turned back even once, if he had ever looked at me and genuinely admitted he was wrong, maybe I wouldn't have pushed it this far. But Vance never regretted hurting me. He only panicked when his privileges were revoked. That evening, my father called. His voice was deep and a little tired, but lacked the strict edge it had in years past. Are you absolutely sure you want to take this to the end? I stood by the glass windows of my office, watching the traffic on the LA freeway blur into streams of light. Dad, if I stop today, tomorrow he will think I was scared. The line was quiet for a long time. The Sterling family had someone reach out to me. They said marital issues should be handled behind closed doors, to not blow this up and ruin both families' reputations. I scoffed softly. Our reputation was ruined the moment their son-in-law abandoned his wife on their wedding night to go sleep with his mistress. Not when I decided to defend myself. My father sighed. It was a very soft sigh, but I could hear the remorse in it. Years ago, when I actively chose a strategic marriage with Vance, many in the family thought I was conceding defeat to my older brother, pushing myself out of the center of power. Only my father knew it was my way of trading a loud battlefield for a quiet chessboard. But even he did not expect the Vance pawn to rot so quickly. Genevieve, I used to think you were too cold. I said nothing. He spoke slowly. But now I understand. If you weren't cold, they would have torn you to pieces a long time ago. My throat tightened for a split second. I had waited years to hear those words from my father. When my brother was decisive, he was praised for leadership. When I was decisive, I was called stubborn. When my brother yelled in a boardroom, it was an executive presence. When I legally destroyed a traitor with evidence, they called me cold-blooded. It turns out, for a woman to stand at the top, she has to hide her pain far better than anyone else. I replied softly, I don't want to win using tears anymore. Then do what you think is right, my father said. I won't interfere. After hanging up, I sat alone in the bright office for a long time. Outside, Kensington Holdings was operating as usual. Thousands of employees were working, contracts needed signatures, shareholders awaited earnings reports. Nobody had the time to pity a betrayed woman, and neither did I. I refused to let myself collapse over a man who wasn't worth it. At nearly 11 p.m., Harrison knocked and entered. Miss Kensington, Vance Sterling is at the gates of the Beverly Hills mansion. He wants to get in. I pulled up the security feed. Vance stood outside the wrought iron gates, the midnight rain coming down in a drizzle against his shoulders. He was buzzing the intercom repeatedly, his face a mix of exhaustion and rage. Behind him, a taxi idled. The driver leaned out the window, demanding payment. Vance dug through his wallet, not enough cash, and his cards were dead. The driver started shouting. The man who used to casually drop $1 million on a watch for his mistress was now arguing over a $50 cab fare. I watched the scene without changing my expression. Have someone pay his cab fare. Then tell him the mansion is under asset seizure protocols and trespassers will be prosecuted. Harrison nodded. Understood. A moment later, a security guard walked out. The moment Vance saw him, he rushed the gate, screaming, Get Genevieve out here! I am her husband! The guard calmly handed the driver the cash, then turned to Vance. Mr. Sterling, the owner has requested the repossession of this property. As of today, you have no access rights to these premises. Vance looked like he had been struck. He grabbed the iron bars, screaming into the rain. Genevieve, come out here! You can't be this heartless. We are husband and wife. I was sitting in a black SUV parked down the street, listening to every word through the security earpiece. Husband and wife. Hearing those words come out of his mouth now was hilariously late. When I was sitting on the bridal bed, he didn't remember we were husband and wife. When he used my money to finance Breyer, he didn't remember we were husband and wife. When he demanded I be understanding so he could go pamper another woman, he didn't remember. I rolled the tinted window down a crack. The cold rain hit my face, but I did not step out. Vance couldn't see me. He just stood there, screaming my name until his voice went hoarse, as if yelling loud enough could turn back time. But some doors, once closed, aren't closed out of anger. They're closed because the person outside permanently lost the right to enter. Take me to my father's estate, I told the driver. The SUV quietly pulled away into the rain. Behind me, Vance's screaming faded, swallowed up by the city. The next morning, Vance did not show up in a crisp suit. He was wearing the same wrinkled dress shirt from yesterday. His leather shoes were caked with dried mud, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were bloodshot from staying up all night. Harrison's detail reported that after being barred from the mansion, he had nowhere to go, ultimately sitting in a 2-4-hour diner off Sunset Boulevard. He ordered the cheapest black coffee and sat there until dawn. The man who casually spent thousands of dollars on a tie was now counting pennies. I listened to the report, put my pen to paper, and signed the final document stripping him of legal representation rights for 3 major development projects. There was no excess emotion in my hands anymore. People often think revenge is about gloating, about euphoric laughter when the traitor falls. Not for me. For me, revenge is like surgically removing a tumor that has grown deep into your flesh. It hurts, it's cold, it requires precision, and your hands absolutely cannot shake. Dear listeners, if you enjoy this, please leave a like to support my channel. Wishing all of you tuning in an abundance of health and peace. Around 9 a.m., Vance went to the Sterling family estate. I guessed he wanted to find a final refuge, but the Sterling household was in far more chaos than he imagined. The moment he walked through the door, his father slapped him hard across the face in front of several relatives. Mr. Sterling was a man obsessed with appearances. His entire life was built on leveraging his ties to my family to drag his company out of debt. Now, with Kensington canceling contracts, banks freezing lines of credit, and partners fleeing, the Sterling family was a rotting ship caught in a hurricane. And in their eyes, Vance was the idiot who had personally drilled a hole in the hull. "You still have the nerve to show your face here?" Mr. Sterling's voice blasted through the audio recording my operatives had intercepted. Vance clutched his cheek, his voice raw. "Dad, Genevieve set me up. She planned all of this. You have to help me talk to the Kensington family." Mr. Sterling laughed a manic, furious laugh. "Talk? You abandoned your wife on your wedding night for some whore, and you embezzled over $6 million from their company. What face do I have left to go talk to them? You are the Kensington son-in-law. She wouldn't dare push this to the edge. Are you still not awake? The Kensington family isn't afraid of you losing face. They're afraid you're going to drag them into the mud with you." Vance was thrown out of his childhood home amidst the curses of his relatives. The mother who used to dote on him merely stood behind the door, crying, not daring to step out and pull her son back. Not because she didn't love him, but because she knew if she kept him, the entire family would die under the weight of the impending lawsuits and debt. I sat in the home office of my father's estate, a cold cup of chamomile tea in front of me. My father placed a file on the desk. Inside were the divorce papers, meticulously drafted by our legal team. He looked at me, his voice deeper than usual. "Do you still love him?" I looked at my signature on the paper. My heart was incredibly still. I loved the man I thought he would become. As for the Vance Sterling of today, he is a stranger to me. My father nodded, a flash of sorrow in his eyes. Perhaps any father would hurt seeing his daughter sever her marriage the day after the wedding. But he did not stop me. He knew better than anyone. If I went soft today, tomorrow I would lose not just my dignity, but Kensington Holdings itself. By noon, Vance started calling the men who used to call him their brother. The first didn't answer. The second claimed he was in a meeting. The third listened, then sighed. "Vance, listen to me. Go apologize to the chairwoman. You can't beat her." Vance roared into the phone, "You're taking her side too?" The other end was silent for a few seconds. "I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm taking the side of the person who holds the fate of my company in her hands." That answer left Vance dead inside. A day ago, these men were raising glasses to him, toasting the billionaire son-in-law, the young CEO, the man to be admired. Today, they ran the math, turned their backs, and cut ties flawlessly. Exactly the way he had turned his back on me. Late that afternoon, he showed up at the gates of Kensington Holdings again. This time, he didn't scream. He stood under the sun, staring up at the towering glass skyscraper, his eyes completely hollow. He couldn't comprehend how, in just 3 days, everything had transformed into a world he could no longer touch. I was in a meeting on the upper floors. Harrison showed me the camera feed. Vance stood there for a long time before pulling out his phone to call me. Still turned off. He switched to texting. The messages popped up on the burner device I had Harrison monitor. "Genevieve, I was wrong. Can I just see you once? We're husband and wife, don't be this ruthless." I read the 3 messages without a single ripple of emotion. If he had said I was wrong on our wedding night, maybe I would still feel the sting. But saying it only after losing his money, his title, his house, and his mistress? That isn't remorse. That is fear. I handed the phone back to Harrison without replying. Next step, I checked my watch. Exactly 5 p.m. on the 3rd day after the wedding night, broadcast the termination notice across the network, and publicly announced that I am officially assuming the role of Chief Executive Chairwoman of Kensington Holdings. Harrison bowed his head. "Yes, Chairwoman." 3 minutes later, the massive LED screens in the Kensington lobby lit up, the stark white text contrasting against the deep blue background. Vance looked up. The color drained from his face until it matched a corpse. His final delusion shattered completely in front of the entire world. The broadcast in the lobby was so blindingly bright no one could pretend not to see it. Effective immediately, Mr. Vance Sterling has been relieved of all executive duties at Kensington Holdings. All representative authority, financial signing powers, and internal access have been permanently revoked. Miss Genevieve Kensington officially assumes the role of Chief Executive Chairwoman. I stood in the 48th floor boardroom, watching through the camera as Vance tilted his head back, his entire body going rigid as if nailed to the lobby floor. Employees walking past paused for a second. Some looked shocked, others looked down and pretended to be busy, but not a single person stepped up to defend him. For 3 years, Vance had grown accustomed to people bowing to his CEO chair. Now that the chair was yanked away, he finally realized he had been standing on thin air. He rushed the reception desk, slamming his fist against the marble. "Get Harrison down here! Get Genevieve Kensington down here right now!" The receptionist paled but maintained her professional tone. "Sir, the chairwoman is in a meeting. If you have an appointment, I can notify her office." "An appointment?" Vance snarled. "I am her husband. I need an appointment to see my own wife?" I heard him over the surveillance audio. The hand I was using to flip through a file paused. Husband. Hearing that word out of his mouth now was both laughable and repulsive. The husband who abandoned his wife on their wedding night for his mistress. The husband who used his wife's money to buy gifts for another woman. The husband who only remembered his title when his privileges were revoked. Harrison stood next to me. "Do you want to see him?" I looked at the screen. Vance was being restrained by 2 security guards, his collar disheveled, his face red with humiliation and rage. "No. Take the divorce papers down to him." 5 minutes later, one of my corporate attorneys appeared in the lobby carrying a gray folder. He walked right up to Vance, his voice perfectly level. "Mr. Sterling, these are your divorce papers and the formal notice of a civil lawsuit regarding the financial assets you misappropriated during your tenure at Kensington Holdings. Please review and sign." Vance stared at the stack of papers, his eyes bloodshot as if his deepest insecurities had just been laid bare. He snatched the folder and ripped the documents to shreds right in front of everyone. The torn white paper fluttered down onto the polished marble floor like the last pieces of his crumbling mask. "Tell Genevieve Kensington I am not signing anything. She thinks she can just throw me away? It's not going to be that easy." The lawyer did not blink. "You have the right to refuse to sign. The legal process will continue regardless. Tearing up the physical copies does not invalidate the filings." That statement drove Vance insane. He tried to lunge forward, but the guards instantly blocked him. People in the lobby started pulling out their phones to record. I signaled Harrison, "Have security escort him out. Do it gently, but make it very clear." On the screen, Vance was dragged out of the lobby in front of dozens of onlookers. He couldn't keep up his arrogant facade anymore. He thrashed and screamed my name, his voice raw. "Genevieve! Come out here! You can't do this to me." I turned the monitor off. Not because I felt soft, but because the scene was no longer worth watching. When a man's only recourse is screaming in a corporate lobby to save face, he has already lost everything. By the afternoon, the termination news leaked to the press. Financial news outlets began running short segments. Kensington Holdings shakes up C-suite. Heiress Genevieve Kensington takes control. I knew Wall Street would instantly read between the lines. They didn't need me to leak stories of Vance's infidelity. They just had to look at how Kensington stripped his power, seized his assets, canceled his cards, and severed ties with the Sterling family. It was painfully obvious he had committed career suicide. As expected, less than an hour later, Harrison's phone was blowing up. Business partners sending congratulations, shareholders requesting meetings. A few executives who used to be close to Vance proactively sent over documents detailing his shady expenditures. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter, but the parasites hiding in the bark will desperately crawl out to beg for mercy. I sat at my desk, reading the messages with utter calm. Outside the glass, the Los Angeles sky shifted into sunset. The dying light fell across my hand, onto the wedding ring now resting inside a black velvet box. I stared at it for a long time, then snapped the box shut. That night, Vance vanished from the cameras around Kensington. Harrison had operatives tracking him remotely, eventually reporting that he had ducked into a cheap public library in a rundown part of East LA. He was using a public computer to log into a secondary social media account. I looked at the screenshots Harrison forwarded. I watched the sentences he was typing out. "I am being driven to the edge by my wealthy wife and her family. On my wedding night, I just went to take care of a severely ill friend. Because of that, she froze my assets, stole my company, and threw me out of my own home. I let out a soft laugh. In the end, when he had no money, no power, and no mistress, he resorted to the cheapest weapon imaginable, playing the victim on the internet. Should we have the platform scrub it immediately? Harrison asked. I looked at the fabricated lies spreading across the screen. No. Let him post it. Let the public opinion ferment. If you want to put out a dirty fire, sometimes you have to let it burn bright enough first. Once everyone sees the smoke, and then you drop the evidence, they'll remember it forever. I stood up and drew the blinds. The city outside was lighting up, and Vance's brand new theatrical production had just begun. Only this time, he was not the one controlling the stage. Vance's post spread faster than I anticipated. Overnight, it was shared across X, Reddit, and various high society gossip blogs. He wrote it cleverly, omitting the fact that he abandoned his wife on their wedding night to sleep with his mistress, omitting the $6.5 million embezzled from Kensington, omitting the condo, the cars, the jewelry, and the luxury goods bought with company funds. In his version of the story, I was a tyrannical, cold-blooded billionaire heiress who used her family's wealth to destroy her husband over a simple misunderstanding. And he was the tragic, noble husband who lost his home, his job, and his honor just for taking care of a sick friend. The next morning, the PR department sent me the social listening reports. People were calling me vicious. They said women with money were evil, that I was abusing my power, that rich people treated others like trash. Some wrote, "It's pathetic. A man makes one mistake, and his wife ruins his entire life." I read the comments without a shred of anger. I just found it amusing. The mob had no idea what it felt like to sit alone in a bridal suite. They didn't hear Vance sneer that he loved someone else. They certainly didn't know that every dollar he spent on Briar was stained with corporate fraud. Harrison stood by my desk, looking grim. "Miss Kensington, if we let this drag on, the public sentiment could impact the stock price and the brand's image." I set the report down. "Is legal ready?" "Yes. The CCTV footage from Briar's apartment complex. The GPS logs from the Porsche on the wedding night, the black card statements, the property deeds and wire transfers to Briar, the forensic audit summary, and the termination timeline. It is all sequenced chronologically." I nodded. "Wait 2 more hours." Harrison looked surprised. "You still want to wait?" He needs to feel a little more confident. When a liar genuinely believes the whole world is on his side, the fall hurts that much more. During those 2 hours, Vance truly believed he had found his lifeline. He posted a second update, even more dramatic than the first. He claimed he had bled for Kensington Holdings. He claimed I was pathologically jealous, and that our marriage was just a tool for my family to control him. He even attached an old photo of us from the wedding reception. I was sitting beside him looking stoic, while he had his head bowed like a battered, enduring husband. Just one photo taken out of context, and he had transformed me into a ruthless dictator, and himself into a martyr. I stared at that photo for a long time. It turns out when someone is committed to lying, they can weaponize even a single captured moment. Fortunately, I had learned not to fight defamation with emotion. Emotion breeds skepticism. Hard evidence shuts people up. At exactly 11 a.m., Kensington Holdings official accounts released a statement. It wasn't long. It wasn't angry. It was just a crystal clear timeline. Wedding night. Vance Sterling's vehicle departs the Beverly Hills mansion at 10:17 p.m., arrives at Briar Sinclair's apartment at 10:48 p.m., departs late the following morning. Attached was the CCTV footage, faces blurred for legal reasons, but his silhouette walking in and holding Briar in the hallway was unmistakable. Following that were the credit card statements: a $12,000 bag, a $40,000 watch, an $80,000 diamond necklace, the $750 Aspen condo, the $160 Mercedes, all linked directly to Briar Sinclair or her relatives. Finally, the legal notice. Kensington Holdings has formally submitted all forensic evidence of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and falsification of documents to the District Attorney's Financial Crimes Unit. The internet exploded. The people who had been cursing my name went dead silent. The sympathetic comments for Vance vanished instantly, replaced by absolute outrage. Someone tweeted, "He abandons his wife on the wedding night to sleep with his mistress and plays the victim?" Another wrote, "Embezzles $6 million from his wife to be a sugar daddy, then cries that she's mean. The audacity." Someone even dug up the video of him fighting Breyer in the lobby, spliced it with the credit card statements, and made him the laughingstock of the entire country. By the afternoon, Vance called Harrison. Harrison put the phone on speaker and set it on my desk. Vance's voice was hoarse, the arrogance entirely stripped away. "Harrison, let me talk to Genevieve. I need to explain." Harrison looked at me. I gave a slight nod. "The chairwoman is listening," Harrison said. The line was quiet for a few seconds. Then Vance's voice broke. "Genevieve, are you really trying to kill me? We were husband and wife. If you release all of this, how am I supposed to live?" I looked out the window, my voice feather-light. "When you were posting lies trying to destroy me, did you care how I was supposed to live?" He choked on his words. "I was pushed into a corner. I was terrified, that's why I did it. Can you please just let me go this one time? I'll sign the divorce papers. I'll leave LA. He won't ask for a dime." I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. "It's too late, Vance. The divorce papers are between you and me. What you stole from Kensington Holdings is between you and the federal government." His voice cracked completely. "Genevieve, I'm begging you." I ended the call. It wasn't that I never had a soft heart, but every time I remembered that wedding night, remembered him telling me he had to go take care of another woman, I knew that if I let him go today, the person buried alive by this marriage would be me. After that call, my office was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Harrison stood nearby, not saying a word. He knew I had just severed Vance's final lifeline. Forgiveness is a beautiful thing when someone is truly remorseful. But with Vance, his begging didn't come from guilt. It came from fear. He was afraid of going to prison, afraid of losing face, afraid of being poor, afraid of Wall Street turning its back on him. As for the pain I endured, the humiliation I swallowed on my wedding night, the dignity he crushed in front of another woman, he never truly saw it. I opened the final file on my desk. A black binder containing every piece of evidence sequenced chronologically. Fake contracts, forged invoices, wire transfer logs, emails coordinating with shadow vendors, text messages instructing accounting to cook the books. There was even an audio recording where he told Breyer, "It's Kensington's money. If I skim a little, no one will ever know." I placed my hand on the binder. It felt like laying my hand on the coffin of a rotting marriage. "Send it," I said. Harrison looked at me. "To the district attorney right now?" "Yes. Do not hold anything back." He nodded, picked up the binder, and left the room. The moment the door clicked shut, I finally let myself sink into my chair. For days, I had been hyper-vigilant, cold, and precise as a machine, but only I knew that beneath that calm exterior was a wound still bleeding. I had hoped Vance would change. I had believed that a man who came from nothing would cherish everything if given the chance. But I was wrong. Some people, when they lack, look pitiable. But the moment they get their hands on power, their true, ravenous nature reveals itself. That afternoon, investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit arrived at Kensington Holdings. I met with them personally in the legal department. The process was swift because the documentation was bulletproof. The lead investigator flipped through the pages. At first, his expression was neutral, but it grew increasingly grim. "Miss Kensington, the preliminary estimated loss is $6.5 million. That is only what the audit has finalized so far," I replied. "There are still anomalies tied to the Sterling family's shell companies currently under review." He looked up at me. "You knew about this for a while." I looked him straight in the eye. I needed irrefutable proof, so no one could dismiss this as a domestic dispute. He stayed silent for a moment, then nodded. "I knew what people thought when a rich wife was cheated on. They assume it's just jealousy, an emotional catfight, something to be swept under the rug. But I wanted absolute clarity. Love can be blind, but the law isn't." That night, Vance showed up at my father's estate again. This time, he didn't scream. He stood under the amber glow of the street lamp in a wrinkled shirt, unshaven, looking skeletal after just a few days. The security guards reported it. My father wanted to have him chased away, but I stopped him. "Let me see him one last time." My father frowned. "Are you sure?" I nodded. I wanted to hear exactly how far he was willing to go. I walked out to the courtyard. The night breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine. The moment Vance saw me, he lunged forward, but the guards held him back. He had lost his arrogance. His eyes were red, his voice utterly shot. "Genevieve, I know I was wrong. Drop the charges. We can divorce. I don't want the money, I don't want anything. Just don't send me to prison." I stood a few feet away, asking calmly, "Where were you wrong?" Vance froze, seemingly shocked by the question. He stammered. I shouldn't have gone to Briar on our wedding night. I shouldn't have made you sad. I stared at him for a long time, then let out a soft laugh. Is that it? He swallowed hard. I shouldn't have spent your money on her. She manipulated me. Genevieve, the person I really love is you. I only realized it these past few days. Without you, I have nothing. Those words turned my heart to ice. Without me, he had nothing. So what did he actually love? Me? Or everything I gave him? I stepped slightly closer, looking at his haggard face. Vance, if your card wasn't frozen today, if your car wasn't taken, your job wasn't lost, and Briar hadn't dumped you, would you be standing here telling me you love me? His lips trembled, but he couldn't form an answer. I gave a slight nod. You see, even you don't dare say yes. Suddenly, he fell to his knees. The sound of his knees hitting the pavement echoed heavily. I am begging you. For the sake of the last 3 years, let me go. I looked down at the man kneeling before me. Over the past 3 years, I had lowered myself for him too many times, waiting up for him, crying over him, deluding myself over a rare crumb of affection. But right now, seeing him on his knees, I felt no joy. I just felt it was entirely too late. I considered the past 3 years when I gave you the chance to resign quietly, I said. But you chose to slander me publicly. I considered the past 3 years when I didn't release the evidence on day 1. But you chose to drag Kensington Holdings through the mud to save your own ego. You don't need my forgiveness, Vance. You need to take accountability. I turned my back and walked away. Behind me, he screamed. Genevieve, if I go to prison, you won't be happy either. I didn't stop, and I didn't look back. At least my hands will be clean. At midnight, I received a text that Vance had been taken into custody. Harrison sent a brief message. The DA accepted the file. He has been arrested. I stared at the text for a long time before turning off my phone. Outside the window, Los Angeles was still glowing. Inside my heart, the final piece of the past finally sank to the bottom. The next morning, I arrived at Kensington Holdings earlier than usual. The city was still damp from the rain, the puddles on the pavement reflecting the pale gray sky. The moment I walked into the lobby, the receptionists bowed respectfully. The probing, judgmental looks from days ago were gone. After the PR release and the evidence dump, they understood that the person they should fear was never the loud, barking Vance Sterling, but the woman who had stayed silent for 3 years to protect the empire from rot. I went straight to the 48th floor. Harrison was waiting in my office with a new report. Miss Kensington, Vance is being held for questioning. Last night, he claimed all major transactions were orchestrated by Briar Sinclair, and he was just facilitating them out of affection. I took off my gloves, set my bag on the desk, and spoke calmly. When there's nowhere left to run, love quickly turns into pointing fingers. Harrison placed a photograph in front of me. In the picture, Briar was pulling her suitcase through LAX. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and a mask, dressed in the designer clothes bought with my card. She had booked a flight to New York, planning to catch a connection to Montreal, to slip across the Canadian border. I looked at the photo for a few seconds. The woman who claimed she was terrified of being alone, who called my husband on my wedding night because she was fragile, sure knew how to run faster than anyone. I closed the file, notify the FBI, hand over all the property deeds, vehicle registrations, and bank records under her name. Already done, Harrison said, including the Aspen condo, the Mercedes, the jewelry, the offshore savings accounts, and 2 wire transfers sent out of the country. I nodded. In this chess game, Vance wasn't the only piece that needed to be swept off the board. If Briar had merely been the other woman, I would have treated her as a dirty stain and moved on. But the moment she accepted money from fraudulent contracts and registered stolen Kensington assets under her name, she was no longer a bystander. By noon, my legal team forwarded me an audio clip from the interrogation room, legally obtained through Discovery. Vance's voice wasn't aggressive anymore. It was pure panic. I didn't know anything. The money transfers were Briar's idea. She said she had connections for an investment project. I just signed the paperwork. The investigator's voice was sharp. You were the CEO. Are you claiming you signed contracts without knowing what they were? Vance was quiet for a long time before his voice shook. I trusted her. I paused the recording right there. I trusted her. What a joke. When I warned him to review anomalous expenses, he accused me of being paranoid. When I asked why Briar was always on his business trips, he called me petty. When I stayed silent, he thought I was stupid. And now, facing federal agents, he was using the word trust to spin his greed into innocence. But black ink on white paper doesn't pity anyone. That afternoon, Breyer was intercepted at LAX. The news came while I was in a meeting with the finance department. Harrison leaned in and whispered it to me. I simply nodded and continued the meeting as if nothing had happened. I refused to let my life revolve around those two for a second longer. But after the meeting, I opened the video file my lawyers sent. Breyer, sitting in an airport interrogation room, had lost all her softness. She pulled her mask down, her face pale, her lips quivering. I just accepted gifts. I didn't know where the money came from. Vance told me it was his to spend. He promised he would divorce his wife and marry me. I'm a victim here. The agent dropped a stack of bank statements in front of her. Then why did you request the funds be wired to your cousin's account? Why is the Aspen condo in your relative's name? Why did you text Mr. Sterling instructing him to structure the payments to evade audit detection? Breyer choked. Her eyes darted around frantically, like a fish out of water. I watched the screen, feeling zero anger. A woman can be poor, she can be weak, she can love the wrong person. But if you know the money is dirty and you take it anyway, if you know the man is married and you drag him into your bed on his wedding night, you don't get to use the word victim to beg for a way out. That evening, Vance's mother came to my family estate. She lacked her usual high society elegance. Her hair was hastily tied up, her eyes swollen and red. The moment she saw me in the living room, she grabbed my hands, her voice breaking. Genevieve, I am begging you. Vance made a terrible mistake, but he is still young. Please give him a way out. I gently pulled my hands away. This was the same woman who once told me that a wife needs to know how to endure, that it was normal for successful men to have arrangements on the side. When I was in agony over Vance staying out all night, she told me to be generous to protect the marriage. Now that her son was facing prison, she was telling me he was still young. I looked at her, my voice perfectly level. Mrs. Sterling, when he used corporate funds to buy an estate for his mistress, he was not too young to know right from wrong. When he went on the internet to slander me, he was not too young to understand the consequences. She burst into tears. But if he goes to prison, his life is over. I answered very softly, and if I let it go, my life is the one that's over. She collapsed into the sofa, sobbing violently. I didn't help her up. Not because I was heartless, but because I was exhausted from being gentle to people who only remembered my kindness when they needed saving. I turned to Harrison. Have someone escort Mrs. Sterling home. Make sure the press doesn't get a photo. After she left, the massive living room was quiet again. My father stepped out of his study and looked at me for a long time. Are you okay? I looked down at my hands. For the first time in days, they were trembling slightly. Not out of regret, but because I finally felt the sheer weight of personally destroying the life of the man I had walked down the aisle with. I'm fine. I will never use love to measure a person's character ever again. My father said nothing. He just placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. Outside, the wind rustled through the courtyard trees, dead leaves scraping against the cold stone. I knew the storm wasn't over. Vance and Breyer were in custody, but behind them were the people inside Kensington Holdings who had enabled him. The ones who rubber-stamped documents, the ones who turned a blind eye, the ones who silently took their cut. And this time, I wasn't going to spare a single one. The next morning, I didn't enter the company through the front doors. Harrison led me down to the subterranean parking garage, to a private executive elevator that went straight to a secure auditing floor. I wanted to look into the eyes of the people who had stood behind Vance. A man like him couldn't embezzle millions for 3 years without someone signing off, someone looking away, and someone actively doctoring the books to let the dirty money slip through. When the doors opened, over a dozen executives from finance and project management were already seated. Some had their heads down, some were wiping sweat from their foreheads. Some tried to look calm, but their hands resting on the table were shaking uncontrollably. I walked in. Without me having to raise my voice, the room instantly went dead quiet, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. I sat at the head of the table and dropped a thick binder in front of me. I am giving you one chance. Whoever confesses first gets a favorable recommendation from legal for cooperating. Anyone who still thinks I don't know everything can keep their mouth shut. No one spoke. The silence was so familiar I found it laughable. 3 years ago, when Vance was appointed, they stayed silent through all his terrible decisions. They didn't object because they feared losing their jobs, or they wanted a cut, or they simply thought I was a weak heiress incapable of flipping the board. Today, that very silence was suffocating them. Harrison turned on the projector. Emails, wire transfer logs, and digital signatures flashed across the screen. Mr. Carmichael, the director of finance, was the first to break. He shot out of his chair, his face pale green. Chairwoman, I only followed Vance's orders. He said you had approved it. I didn't dare ask questions. I looked at him. A $12 million shell contract, and you didn't dare ask questions? 3 wire transfers to shadow companies, and you didn't dare ask? But when the kickbacks landed in your son's bank account, you certainly dared to take them. Mr. Carmichael collapsed back into his chair. His lips moved, but no words came out. A VP of project management burst into tears. I was blackmailed. Vance said if I didn't sign off on the fake inspections, he'd fire me. I asked. And after you signed, who gave you the $80,000 Rolex? She stopped crying instantly, the sobs dying in her throat. I don't hate weak people, I said, but I despise people who use weakness as an excuse to sell their souls. If you enabled fraud just to keep your job, who is going to answer for the honest employees who lost their livelihoods when those projects were bled dry? Just as the tension hit a breaking point, the boardroom doors swung open. My older brother, Alistair Kensington, marched in. He wore a sharp gray suit, perfectly styled hair, and that familiar smirk of a man who believed he was born to rule. To the extended family, he was still the golden heir. I was just the daughter my father gave a little power to, so I could play business. He looked around the room and locked eyes with me. Genevieve, haven't you done enough? The company is already dealing with the PR nightmare of your marriage. Now you want to drag the internal executives out for a public execution? I leaned back in my chair. You're right on time. Your file is the second one in the stack. Alistair's smirk froze. What did you just say? Harrison stepped forward and placed a separate binder on the table. I flipped it open and slid it toward him. Apex Dynamics, registered to your college roommate, received 3 subcontractor bids from Vance's projects. Total value, $1.7 million. $700,000 of that was routed to an account in the Cayman Islands, before looping back into a hedge fund managed by your former assistant. Do you want me to keep reading? Alistair's face changed colors, but he ground his teeth. You investigated me? I looked right at him. I investigated everyone who bled Kensington Holdings dry. He slammed his hand on the table. Don't forget, I am your brother. I laughed softly. I had heard that line way too many times. When he stole my projects, he was my brother. When he told me I should just marry well and not covet power, he was my brother. When he secretly colluded with Vance to split dirty kickbacks, he actually thought he could play the family card to make me back down. I stood up, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. Because you are my brother, you should have known better than to treat Kensington like a personal piggy bank. Alistair looked past me to the doorway. My father, leaning on his cane, had just walked in. His face looked years older after the storm of the past few days. Alistair panicked. Dad, let me explain. Genevieve is being irrational. Her husband cheated on her, so now she's paranoid and trying to take everybody down. My father looked at Alistair. His eyes held no rage, only bottomless disappointment. I gave you so many chances. Alistair froze. But you chose to partner with a traitor to rob your own family's legacy, my father finished. Alistair took a step back. In that moment, I saw his impenetrable armor crack. He wasn't afraid of me, but he was terrified of losing our father's validation. Unfortunately, some things, once lost, cannot be salvaged with a few panicked excuses. I turned to Harrison. Transfer all files regarding Alistair to legal. Effective immediately. Suspend all of his administrative functions at Kensington Holdings. Alistair roared, Genevieve, you wouldn't dare! I looked at him, articulating every single word. I have been daring since my wedding night. The boardroom was dead silent. The remaining executives finally understood that this purge wasn't just about Vance. I was ripping out every single rotten root choking Kensington Holdings, whether it was my ex-husband, his mistress, trusted executives, or my own flesh and blood. When Alistair was escorted out, his eyes were full of venom, but I didn't look away. To protect what you build, sometimes you have to accept being called heartless by your own family. I closed the binder and looked at the rest of the room. Now, whoever wants to confess, start talking. This time, no one stayed silent. After that audit meeting, Kensington Holdings underwent major surgery. The people hiding behind Vance wrote their confessions. Some cried and begged, some blamed their bosses, some quietly wired back their kickbacks and resigned that very night. I didn't keep anyone out of pity, nor did I fire anyone out of spite. Everything was handled by the book, strictly according to the evidence and the liability they chose when they signed dirty paperwork. My brother Alistair was stripped of all authority. My father didn't speak another word to him. His silence was heavier than any screaming match. I knew my father was hurting, but a family empire cannot survive if it uses bloodlines to shield criminals. If I forgave Alistair just because he was my brother, what right did I have to punish the others? 3 weeks later, Vance's case went to preliminary trial. It was drizzling in Los Angeles that morning. I wore a sharp black suit with no jewelry other than simple pearl earrings. When my car pulled up to the federal courthouse, reporters were swarming the steps. Camera flashes blinded me, and questions were shouted from every direction. Miss Kensington, do you plan to forgive Mr. Sterling? Do you regret the marriage? What do you have to say to the Sterling family calling you ruthless? I stopped on the courthouse steps and turned to face the cameras. I am not ruthless. I simply refuse to let emotions cover up a crime. With that, I walked inside. Harrison stayed half a step behind me, carrying the briefcase. When the courtroom doors opened, I saw Vance. He was sitting at the defense table, severely emaciated. His hair was buzzed short, his complexion gray. The man who had adjusted his $4,000 tie in the mirror on our wedding night, coldly stating he had to go take care of another woman, was now slouching in a wrinkled jumpsuit, his knuckles white from gripping his hands together. When he saw me, his eyes instantly grew red. I didn't know if it was regret, fear, or just pure despair at seeing the final door slam shut. Briar was there too. She sat at the opposing table. No white dress, no soft voice, no fragile victim act. She looked sallow, constantly hiding her face from the sketch artists. When the prosecutor read out the assets she had received from illicit funds, she broke down crying. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was company money. Vance said he loved me. He said they were gifts. Vance snapped his head toward her, his voice grating. You're lying. You were the one who told me to wire the money to your cousin. You said it would be safer. Briar screamed back. If you weren't so greedy, who could have forced you to sign anything? You have a wife, and you still promised to marry me. You conned me. The two people who had held each other on my wedding night, who treated me as nothing but an obstacle to their grand romance, were now tearing each other to pieces in federal court. I sat in the victim's gallery watching in silence. My heart didn't hurt anymore. Some love affairs were never clean to begin with. When the money dries up, the only things left are blame and hatred. After my legal team presented our evidence, the courtroom was deathly quiet. The cold, hard numbers spoke louder than any sob story. 6.5 million stolen. Dozens of shell contracts. Assets laundered through Briar's relatives. Luxury expenses categorized as project overhead. Every piece of evidence was a brick pulled from the fake castle Vance had built for himself. When the judge asked if he had a statement, Vance stood up, his lips trembling. I admit to my crimes, but I just want to say a few words to my wife. Every eye in the room shifted to me. I did not flinch. Vance looked at me, his voice shattering. Genevieve, I know it's too late. I used to think you only had everything because you were born rich. I thought everything I achieved was because I was a genius. It wasn't until I lost it all that I realized you were the only reason I was standing. I am so sorry for that night. I am so sorry I hurt you. I looked at him. If I were the Genevieve from 3 years ago, just that apology would have brought me to tears. But now, I just felt a bizarre sense of peace. I stood up. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. Vance, I accept your apology, but accepting an apology does not erase the consequences. I loved you. I trusted you. I gave you infinitely more than you deserved. But starting today, I am returning you to the justice system. And I am returning my freedom to myself. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. I sat back down and didn't look at him again. That afternoon, the court recessed before sentencing the following day. When I walked out of the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The wet asphalt reflected the gray sky, but in the distance, a thin ray of sunlight was breaking through the clouds. My father was waiting by the car. He didn't ask how it went. He just handed me an umbrella. Let's go home. I looked at the umbrella in his hand, then back at the courthouse. Some chapters in life are like a rainstorm. When you are in it, you think it will never end. But as long as you keep walking, the sky will eventually clear. On sentencing day, I went to the courthouse alone. My father wanted to come, and Harrison offered to escort me inside, but I declined. There are some doors you have to walk through by yourself, just as there are wounds only you know are truly healed. Vance stood before the judge, hollow-eyed, completely devoid of the arrogance of the man who had abandoned me. Briar sat nearby, her head bowed, her hands gripping her shirt. As the judge read the verdict, the room was perfectly still. Vance was sentenced for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of executive authority, and ordered to pay full restitution. Briar was convicted as an accessory for receiving, concealing, and laundering illicit funds. Several internal Kensington executives were also handed sentences corresponding to their involvement. Every name read aloud was like a stone dropped into a muddy pond, bringing all the filth hidden at the bottom to the surface. Vance turned to look at me. His eyes weren't begging anymore, they were just a desolate, empty void. His lips moved slightly. "Genevieve, I'm truly sorry." I looked at him, and it didn't hurt. Perhaps that was the true sign of letting go. When an apology arrives too late, it doesn't salvage anything, but it can close the book. I gave a slight nod. I didn't accept the apology to forgive him. I accepted it to free myself from the ghost of all those nights I spent waiting, crying, and wondering why I wasn't enough. Briar sobbed as she was led away. She didn't look at me. She probably knew we had nothing to say to each other. A woman who chooses to step into someone else's marriage, who takes dirty money and weaponizes her own fragility, eventually has to pay the tab. I didn't curse her. I only hoped she learned that tears cannot wash away greed. After the hearing, I didn't go straight home. I had my driver take me to the Beverly Hills mansion. The property had been seized, cleared out, and sealed pending asset liquidation. I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom where it all began. The red sheets had been stripped. The roses were gone. The candles were gone. The massive room only smelled of cold hardwood and pale sunlight filtering through the blinds. I walked over to the vanity where I had unclasped my diamond earrings on my wedding night. In the mirror, the woman looking back was no longer an abandoned bride, nor was she a wife pretending to be strong to hide her broken heart. That was me, Genevieve Kensington. A woman who walked through betrayal, loss, humiliation, and devastation and was still standing. I took the black velvet box out of my purse and pulled out the wedding ring. The diamond still sparkled, but it meant absolutely nothing to me. I placed it on the vanity, right next to the finalized divorce decree. As of today, this marriage was officially history. "Time to go home, Genevieve," I whispered to myself. 3 months later, Kensington Holdings held its annual strategy conference at a grand convention center in downtown LA. I stood on the stage, looking out at the shareholders, partners, employees, and a sea of media cameras. No one called me the sheltered second daughter anymore. No one said I was just a lucky heiress. I stood there on my own name, built on what I had protected, repaired, and forged. As my keynote concluded, the auditorium erupted in applause. I looked down at the front row and saw my father smiling. It wasn't a massive smile, but it was enough to make my eyes sting. Before stepping off the stage, I delivered my closing remark. A woman's value does not need to be granted by anyone else. When she learns to protect herself, stand back up, and take control of her own narrative, she becomes her own greatest empire. That night, I went back to my father's estate. The LA evening was breezy. I sat on the patio with a cup of hot tea, listening to the leaves rustling in the courtyard. My life did not return to the way it was. But exactly because it didn't return to the way it was, I could start a new journey cleaner and far more peaceful. I used to think losing a man meant losing love. Later, I realized that losing a man who didn't value me was just God's way of giving me the whole sky back. Dear listeners, if you are tuning into this story, I hope Genevieve Kensington's journey serves as a reminder that in marriage, the most terrifying thing isn't poverty, it is betrayal, greed, and the disrespect of the person sleeping next to you. No matter how deeply a woman loves, she must retain her self-respect, her clarity, and her ability to protect herself. When you are hurt, don't rush to collapse, and don't let tears dictate your life. Sometimes, walking away is not a defeat. It is the most powerful way to reclaim your peace, your dignity, and your future. This has been a dramatic family and marriage story about a wife betrayed on her wedding night, who flips the board, makes greed pay the price, and finds her freedom after the wreckage. The characters and plot above are a work of original fiction and are not based on true events. The narration provided is AI generated. Here are my personal takeaways from this story. In love and marriage, never sacrifice your self-respect to keep someone who no longer values you. Money, status, and titles can change people, but they also reveal who is genuine and who is only there for the benefits. Whether man or woman, independence is crucial. When you have the power to stand on your own 2 feet, no one can emotionally manipulate you. Forgiveness is a beautiful virtue. but it does not mean covering up crimes or allowing people to repeatedly hurt you. A happy family must be built on loyalty, respect, and kindness. Without those, no matter how wealthy the exterior, the house is empty inside. To our dear listeners, I hope this story inspires you to love yourself more, to cherish those who are truly there for you, to live with kindness and clarity, and to keep your families filled with peace, joy, and happiness. End.